Shani from the Genius Dog Challenge at ELT University. If you're new to our channel, please go ahead and check our challenge description video that I'm going to link down below for you. Today with us is Dr. Claudia Fugaza, the head of our research group. Hi, Claudia!
Hi, hello everyone.
I'm also super excited to introduce today's guest, Ken Ramirez. Ken is both a biologist and an animal behavior specialist, as well as a renowned dog trainer. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Shani. How are you? Hi, Claudia. Nice to see you both.
Hi, very nice to have you here, Ken. Actually, I have to say that we already met a couple of months ago online because we live far. And we met because you published a video of your own dog, which seems to be a genius dog because your dog was in the video, seemed to be able to recognize several objects by their names, right? And your dog's name is Marlon. I came to know when we met. And can you tell us a little more about him?
Yeah, he was originally a shelter dog, a dog that we rescued from a shelter in Chicago. And I rescued him in particular because he was about 3 years old at the time. So that was 7, almost 8 years ago. So Marlon's now 10 or 11 years old. And I rescued him because he was a very friendly dog. We were working on an aggression project, and we had been dealing with a lot of very aggressive dogs, and he did not have aggressive tendencies. He had good socialization behavior. He played well with other dogs. So we sort of picked him because he seemed like he would be a good choice to help us facilitate that kind of learning. But as I worked with him, one of the things that have always fascinated me have been a variety of cognitive projects that I used to do when I worked with primates and with dolphins. And so when I started working with dogs, I started experimenting a little bit. And one of the first things that I did with Marlon was a match to sample exercise. I would show him a toy, I'd show it to him and then ask him to match it or find it. And I would present 2 toys or 2 items and 3 items, and he would go find that particular item. And with time, he got better and better and better at it. And at the time, it was just a visual match to sample. He would see the object and then go match the one that looked the same. As time went on, I began teaching him names for each of the objects, and he ended up being able to very clearly identify 15 or 16 objects. He actually did more than that, but after some time, I wasn't sure if it was just an accidental finding. He probably knows 20 or 22 object names, but he has 15 or 16 that he does very reliably.
That's very interesting, Ken. And I find it very interesting also that you started with a match to sample task and then that it's sort of translated into learning the names of the objects. So, eventually this may have facilitated the task of learning the names of the objects.
Oh, I think it definitely did. I think as you know, dogs are far more keen on recognizing body motion and movements and things of that nature. And so I felt that a visual cue was probably going to be far easier. And I think Marlon paid less attention to what I was saying. Once he learned the task and got that task down really, really well, I began giving the objects names. Very much I did a cue transfer procedure, just like if you teach your dog to sit using a visual cue and then later you want to make it a verbal cue, I would then add the verbal name for it in front of the visual cue, and then he would pair them and pretty much learn what sit means. And the same thing was true with toys. I would have a frog, or I would have a star, or I would have a variety of objects. But at the beginning, all I did was show it to him, and then he would go find the thing that looked the same. Later, I gave this a name, and then pretty soon I quit showing it and just used the name, and he still was able to find the object that I had taught him.
That's very, very interesting, Ken. Thank you for sharing this experience with us. And indeed, I mean, I was also thinking that there's a bunch of studies showing that animals tend to rely more on gestures rather than words, or on visual aspects of the language and of the communication rather than words, while we humans put a lot of attention and emphasis on the actual words that we say. And this seems to differ somehow between human animals and non-human animals. So how do you think this impact or translates into day-to-day life between owners and dogs?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because I think people have this tendency to want to talk to their dogs, and they believe their dogs understand everything that they say. And I know that when I'm working with trainers, they will say to me, for example, my dog knows the cue for sit. All I have to do is say sit and he will sit. And often I give them a challenge. I say, well, let's experiment with that and see if it's truly the word sit. And I'll tell them, if you think your dog really knows what the word sit means, why don't you turn your back on your dog and say sit? Why don't you lay down and say sit? Why don't you use a walkie-talkie and say sit and see what happens? And most of the time, I would say 75 to 80% of the time, the dog will not sit if the person is laying down or if the person is turning their back. And that's because often when we say sit, what we do is we look at our dog and we lean forward and go, sit. And pretty soon the dog learns that that forward motion is the cue for sit, not the word sit. And a lot of trainers are surprised by that. And so I always like to explain to my clients and the people that I'm working with, while it may look like our dogs are listening to everything we say, more often than not, they're very smart and they just learn what our body language is telling them. And when they see us put our shoulder in, when they see us tilt our head a certain way, that actually is the cue that they're paying attention to more often than the words. It's not that dogs can't understand words. They can. It's just not natural for them, and they actually have to be taught it, in my experience.
That's very interesting indeed. And we might put our viewers to the test, and maybe they can test their dogs this way. So they could try to sit with their dogs. If they think that their dogs know the sit, then now you could try what Ken is suggesting. I think it's going to be fun.
It is a lot of fun, and it often surprises people when they find out their dog doesn't understand, and because they've been so positive that the dog knows what the word means, when really the dog is paying attention to everything in the environment, and our motions and our body language tends to tell the dog so much more than our words.
That's super interesting. So do you have a tip for our viewers how they can improve their communication with their dogs? Because, I mean, body language is still there. We could still use it, I guess. What's your opinion on this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot that I think is important when working with our dogs. And I think one of the first things I like to do is suggest to my clients that they learn to read the dog's body language. So often, our dogs are telling us if they're nervous, if they're happy, if they're worried, if they're uncertain, and we can often read that from their body language. And I think many times we have this idea in our head that if a dog is wagging his tail, it means he's happy, when realistically that there are so many things that our dogs are telling us based on their eyes, their body position. So when my clients are interested in communicating better with their dogs, the first thing I suggest is that they really learn to read their own animal's body language, because then they can interpret what that dog is trying to say. They will understand their dog's comfort level, and that will make them far better communicators themselves because they'll understand their dogs. And I also always tell them, like we just talked about, to be aware that the dog is very aware of everything going on in their environment. And so many times what we think is a cue may not actually be the cue that the dog is picking up on. And so one of the things that will help them a lot is if they become more conscious of what's going on in the environment. Dogs can do really well, for example, and do excellent in the backyard, but then you take them to another room or take them to another location, and they may not be able to do the behavior well. And it's not because they're not smart animals. It's simply because the context and the environment has so much to do with the way they perceive the world. So I think there's a lot that can go to helping improve communication, from reading their body language and recognizing what about our body and about our environment affects their behavior.
That's so interesting. Thank you very much for this input. Guys, don't only talk to your dogs, also listen back to what they're saying.
Right.
Yeah, observe what they're saying.
And observe
Exactly.
what they're saying. Yeah. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
And to all of you at home, guys, don't forget to follow and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our updates. See you next time.